The Trump tariffs have roiled the global economy and America's too. Markets are all over the place, and some experts believe a recession is quite possible. Most mainstream economists argue the tariffs, and these tariffs in particular, are a terrible idea. But the president's aides and MAGA faithful beg to differ. What are the arguments on both sides? Well, you're about to hear them. Larry Summers served as Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, and Oren Cass is known as a MAGA intellectual. He's the founder of the conservative think tank American Compass. Welcome both. Oren, let me start with you. You've long argued for a 10% across the board tariff, and you've long argued for tariffs that would help America decouple from China's economy. So I think it's fair to say that where we have ended up at the end of last week has ended up pretty much where you want it to be. And I just want to begin by throwing up a few charts to show you what the market reaction to those policies has been. So if you look at expected change in prices over the next year, inflation expectations, they're higher than they've been in, I think, about 40 years. If you look at U.S. asset performance, the 30-year Treasury is down, the dollar is down, the S&P 500 is down. If you look at the index of consumer sentiment, it's, again, the lowest in 40 years. So consumer sentiment has tanked. Inflation expectations have soared, and people are fleeing almost every dollar asset. Isn't that a pretty decisive verdict against your policies?
Well, thank you for having me, Fareed. I think it's really important to have a clear discussion about the different ideas here. You know, the two policies that I'm very supportive of, one is the 10% across the board tariff, as you mentioned. The other is much higher tariffs on China that I've proposed and been arguing throughout this period need to be phased in gradually. So, you know, I think I would say I agree with and have been making a lot of the same criticisms about the uncertainty that's been created by the way that some of these tariffs have been put into place. And certainly going as high as we've gone, as quickly as we've gone on China, I think is not the way to transition there. I will say, though, that I have a hard time swallowing this analysis that sort of focuses on stock prices as the appropriate measure of good economic policy, especially to the extent that criticism is now coming from the left of center. You know, no one.
But Oren, I showed you 5 charts with 5 different indices, not just stocks. I showed you bonds, I showed you stocks, I showed you the dollar, I showed you inflation expectations, and I showed you consumer sentiment.
Well, I think the consumer sentiment measure reflects the uncertainty that we've seen. And I completely agree that we need to do this in a way that has less uncertainty and a lot more stability. But the idea that we're going to measure the quality of our economic policy by the rate of increase in the value of financial assets, I think is deeply mistaken. That, of course, is exactly what all the major corporations have been lobbying for the last 25 years, to the point of your monologue. That has led to an economic model that did produce extraordinary stock returns and not such good results either for the American industrial base or for workers and their families. And so I think it's important to recognize here that the need for corrective is very real. We need to do a better job getting it right on the specifics. But I'm really concerned by the people who look at the situation and say, no, what we really should do is just what we've been doing since the year 2000, which is embrace this kind of hyper-globalization that has not worked well for America at all.
All right, Larry, let me give you a chance to respond.
So nobody's saying that the stock prices are the right criterion for judging economic policy. Oren and I completely agree that what happens to the middle class is what's crucial. However, when you cause financial markets to gyrate in a way that is where there are only 3 compares, the 1987 crash, the pandemic, and the 2008 financial crisis, and you do that not because of some external event, but because of the rhetoric of the President of the United States and the threats of the President of the United States, you're making a pretty big mistake. When you cause the consensus judgment of economists to be that the main hope for avoiding recession is a policy reversal, you're making a pretty egregious error. when even the leading intellectual in favor of the president's approach, Oren, thinks it's been done in a blunderbuss way with much too rapid increases in tariffs, much too much uncertainty created, you're doing things in an inept way. And you pointed out something very important, Fareed, in your comment, that it's not making it better when you start giving an exemption here and an exemption there. It's introducing all kinds of corruption into the system. It's introducing what economists call rent-seeking, where it's hugely advantageous for people to be friends of the first family, hugely advantageous for people to hire lobbyists. So the big boom that's being created here is in crony capitalism. I'm all for the middle class. Judging policies by what happens to the middle class is exactly right. But when you tank their sentiment worse than it's been tanked in 20 years, you're not looking out for the middle class. When you make inflation higher expectations even than it was during the Biden stimulus, you're not looking out for the middle class. So this is the worst self-inflicted wound through economic policy since the Second World War. It's wrong on competitiveness, wrong on unemployment, wrong on inflation, wrong on uncertainty. The best thing we can hope for is that people start to see sense and reverse these errors.